Welcome to the Agile Localization Podcast by Crowden, where we unpack the strategies and solutions that make localization fast, scalable, and efficient. I'm your host, Stefan Huyghe. Good morning from dark Texas. It's cold here now all of a sudden. For the past 3-4 months, I've been saying it's warm and sunny, but it's not this morning. We're here with the great Jan Amann, straight from Austria. Jan's an internationalization expert who has his own internationalization course. Jan, I'm not doing you justice. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience a little bit better?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the podcast, Stefan. So my name is Jan. People mostly know me from my open source work on Next-intl, which is an internationalization library for Next.js. I've also recently published a course on it. And other than that, I'm also a freelance developer and I'm also a university teacher at Austria. So that's mostly what I do.
We're going to lay you bare here in this half hour of podcast because you're precisely the kind of interesting technical person we love to talk to on the Agile Localization Podcast. So let's talk about your journey into multilingual development a little bit. You have a course that's quite well known on internationalization. It's the Learn.Next Internationalization Development course. How did that come about? Tell us the story.
Yeah, so I've been working on this open source project, Next-intl, for close to 5 years at this point now. And over that time, I just talked to so many developers who work on internationalization and need this in their apps. And you can, of course, meet these people who are like really excited and they say they have the best internationalization setup. But it seemed like quite frequently it occurred to me that people were like, we're not so happy with it, or like maybe next time we'll do it slightly different, try something else. So there's a bit of struggle here from the technical perspective, it seems. But at the same time, and I probably don't need to mention this on this podcast, but internationalization is just so important. There's this study which I really like to quote, and it says like, when it comes to e-commerce, around 70% of people prefer to buy in their native language, and around 40% will only buy if the service or the product is available in their language. So it's just so important, and it's a pity that I see developers struggling with it so much. And it seems like this is a service I can do to developers, and that's why I built the course. And I mean, of course, from the perspective of an internationalization library, we can solve some aspects, but the course tries to go significantly further and tries to cover the whole picture.
Why do you think developers often underestimate the complexity of internationalization?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think developers who are starting out with internationalization, they sometimes believe internationalization means translating words. And I actually put this literally as a headline in the Next-intl docs at this point. Internationalization is not just translating words, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. For the course, I've taken a step back and I've identified 3 areas where I think there are misconceptions or confusion from developers. And the first one is about assumptions. So, of course, there will be a mother tongue which you're capable of speaking very well. But there are a lot of people in the world who speak one language, then about an equal part which speaks maybe 2 languages, but only very few people speak 3 or more languages than that. So what naturally happens is
You're making me feel special this morning because I speak 4. How many do you speak, Jan?
Well, my mother tongue is German. Of course, I speak a bit of English, but I think these are the languages which I'm most proficient in. I learned a bit of Chinese when I was in Shanghai a few years ago, and currently I'm learning Spanish a bit, but still, I mean, that's not quite a language I'm fluent in right now, but more something I'm learning.
What's the structure of the course? How long is the course online if somebody wants to take it?
So it's quite video-centric, and it's about 5.5 hours. But there are like also references. It's designed in a way so that you can watch the content when you have time, like for example on your morning commutes or on the couch or in the treadmill on your gym. But then later you can apply the lessons to your particular project. So if you're watching all the videos, it will be a bit more than 5 hours. But of course, applying it to your project, which is the most important part, will take a bit of time. But I think generally you can watch the thing in a week to get like a really solid understanding of internationalization, to have all the pieces in place to apply to your project.
Yeah. How do you think your developer background shapes the way you're teaching these concepts?
Yeah, so I briefly mentioned before, so I'm also a university teacher. And something I find is if you're teaching a concept, you can approach it from two angles. So either you discuss a concept up front and you make sure that theory is properly understood, and then you apply it practically in a project. But you can also do it from another angle. And like if you do it this way, a reaction I sometimes get from students is like, yeah, this is helpful, this is good to know. But I think you can also do it from another angle where you're starting with code if you're teaching developers, and then you try to push yourself and the students towards a place which is really hard to solve with the concepts that you know so far. And then at that point, when the struggle begins, you take a step back and then you discuss the concept which helps you solve this, and then you jump back in and solve the thing. And I think the reaction is very different if you do it this way. Usually from students, the reaction is more like, oh, this is so helpful, like, this is very good. And I think in the end, you've taught the exact same thing, but the difference is the understanding for the problem is just so much more there. And that's something that I'm trying in the course as much as I can as well.
Who would you recommend to go look to take your course? What's typically your audience? Is it different from the people you teach at the university, or what's the variety?
So the students I teach at university, it's a course in the bachelor's degree. So for those students, it's the first time they're using React. So we're starting a little bit slower, and of course we need to cover more the foundational work. I think the internationalization course that I put out is for developers who have at least basic understanding of React, and they've maybe implemented one or two components which can be used in Next.js as well. But it's still targeted quite at the people who are like on the foundational level, but it goes quite far into the advanced area. So people who are already using React and Next.js for a few years, they should get a lot out of the course.
All right. And what's the most rewarding aspect of teaching people internationalization? Do you have any success stories you can share with our audience?
Yeah, I mean, the reception for the course so far has been really good, and I'm really happy about that. But I think what touched me the most was hearing from developers who've used Next-intl, the open source project I'm working on, for multiple years. So for them, internationalization is definitely not something new. But after they took the course and they told me they've learned so many new things that they can apply right today, that was probably the best I could hope for from the course.
Yeah, and you're architecting these multilingual applications in Next JavaScript, right? Or and what makes that a strong or your preferred framework for multilingual applications?
Right. So I think if you look at why Next.js is generally a good framework for building applications, I think my answer would be is because it just covers a wide variety of topics that you'll eventually need when building an application. It starts with, of course, delivering HTML markup to display in the browser, but routing is a big area. Executing server-side code is a big area. This communication between the client and server-side is there. And it also goes into more advanced topics like, for example, generating sitemaps. And all the points that I just mentioned to you are all relevant for internationalization. So I think that makes it very helpful for developers when they need internationalization to have answers from their framework, how they can use it. And I mean, of course, also from my side for teaching it, it's very helpful because it can provide answers for all of that. And I think the cherry on top is, for example, Next.js can also do open graph generation. So if you're generating images with text on top, you can apply that with localized text, for example, which is like really helpful.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you because at Crowden we're always interested in how to simplify people's life from a technical point of view. And how does Next-intl simplify internationalization for developers, do you think?
Yeah, so I think there are three areas where Next-intl can help developers. And the first one is rendering translations or managing them within your app at runtime. The second point is formatting dates, times, currencies, numbers in general. And the third area is routing, which needs to integrate with your particular internationalization strategy. So a lot of customization is usually needed in that area. So these are topics which I think developers have an immediate need for. If they need to work, if they need to implement internationalization, these are like the first few things they'll need when implementing this. And I think Next-intl is in a good position here for providing immediate answers here for you, but then also providing the course which paints basically the rest of the picture, which are like so many aspects, like for example, integrating with your backend, integrating with your content management system, adapting your search engine optimization strategy, integrating with a translation management system like Crowdin, which helps you to ship with up-to-date translations very quickly in an agile way. So that's kind of the spectrum of the course.
Yeah, and how do you ensure performance doesn't degrade as you increase the languages?
Right. So when you're building an internationalization library for JavaScript applications, a question that you'll need to answer at the beginning is, do you split your messages or do you split your translations by messages, which is like one particular label that you're displaying to the user, or by language? And if you take the first approach, usually from a technical perspective, your bundler can help you a little bit more with tree shaking. So you're only bundling the messages which are used for components rendered on a particular page. So that's quite helpful, but I think it's limiting in the regards to once you're adding new languages to your application, there is a runtime cost involved there. So Next-intl takes a different stance here. We say that there is a performance baseline that your app has for generally being used, being rendered. But then if you're adding new languages to your app, the runtime performance is not changed at all. And this is practically very important. For example, the Ethereum website uses Next-intl, and they're localizing to 67 languages at this point. So for them, it's not really a question like, can they add one language more? But the runtime performance needs to stay exactly the same. But then again, if we're going down this route, there's still a little bit of optimization necessary for making sure only the relevant messages are rendered for each page and component. So right now, today, you can achieve this with manual optimization in Next-intl, but I'm definitely planning on providing further assistance there to do it in an automatic way. So I think that's something I'll have updates for in the future.
Awesome. And since you're the expert on the way you're architecting these multilingual apps in Next.js, what are some of the pitfalls you can save developers from encountering and that you've encountered when structuring these multilingual projects?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to internationalization, most developers intuitively have an understanding that in some way or another, you'll have to translate your user interface. But I think the problem starts to arise when you don't really have a clear picture on if you're building something multilingual, multi-regional, or maybe a combination of both. So even within a single country, if you take Canada as an example, there are two natively spoken languages, which are English and French. So even if you're building a service or product which is only available to Canada, you already need to support two languages. But the same is also true if you take a country like Austria, for example, and the natively spoken language here is German. But then again, you see, for example, if you go to the Nike website, if you're in Austria, you can also choose to browse in English. And it makes a lot of sense because simply because you're based in Austria doesn't mean to be proficient in this language. So there might be also other languages which you want to support in countries which only have one native language. But that's only the multilingual aspect. As soon as you're crossing borders, of course, you need to ask yourself questions like supporting different currencies, supporting different time zones, like us today. You're sitting in the dark, and for me, it's bright daylight. So these are kind of interesting problems to solve, and absolutely not mutually exclusive. But a lot of companies need both multilingual and and multi-regional adaptation. So I think having a clear picture here and then applying this systematically throughout your product is really important.
Yeah, let's explore the user experience and cultural adaptations a little bit. We started talking about it in the last question. What, in your opinion, makes a delightful multilingual user experience in this day and age? It's changing a little bit as well. I'm thinking, but go ahead. I'm really interested in your answer.
Yeah. I think my stance is, so my first job after graduating was actually in user experience design. And I would sometimes joke, we're always talking about building the best possible user experience, something that feels really great. And that's certainly something really good to aim for. But my experience is often when using digital products and websites, we're already doing good service to the user if we're not annoying them. And I think also when it comes to internationalization, there are just so many things which are like downright annoying if you don't really get them right. So one example is if you have poor translations. So if you're just dumping all of your strings into ChatGPT and that's your internationalization strategy, people from languages which is not the language your product was originally built in, it will feel like really not good to them. And also missing translations is one area. So if you're not using a translation management system, it can be hard to timely ship the relevant translations for your app. So that can be another area. But then, of course, there are many more aspects on top, like, for example, not having considered that translations might have different lengths, or like words have different lengths in different languages. So the result will be broken layouts, and also numbers might be different. So there's this list, and I think solving these problems is not about getting to a really great user experience, but it should be the baseline. Like, this should be the minimum that we aim for. And if we've already solved this, I think we can, of course, aim for a great user experience, which is, for example, words are, of course, a very important part. And I think most people can agree good copy and great copy, there is a huge difference in between. So taking the time for really optimizing it for certain languages can make a huge difference. But also adapting colors or symbols for certain cultures can be really important.
Yeah, in the best user experience, the user isn't even aware that anything was adapted. It just feels like a natural experience altogether. That's usually the way I calibrate it in my head. How should developers test localized experiences across languages, in your opinion?
Right. So, if you research the topic, there are solutions coming up, like, for example, pseudo-localization, which is about translating the words you're using in your user interface to a kind of gibberish language, which has longer word length and also uses special characters in an attempt to break your layouts and to break your character sets of the fonts you're using. So that can be like a good solution to you. But I think as developers, we're a bit spoiled with automatic linters and automatic tests running. So if the console doesn't scream to us in red color that something is broken, sometimes we assume that it should be right. But that's not really the case. If we're discussing user experience, there's always this manual testing involved, I think. Like, the linter can never really tell you if the user experience is good. And I think also when it comes to translating websites and apps, it's just so important to sit down with native speakers, show them your site or your app, and really listen to them. And you might be really surprised about what you hear from them.
Yeah. If you had to summarize a golden rule for multilingual UX, what would it be, Jan?
Yeah, I think you nailed it very, very well before. So I think the goal should be for your users to feel kind of at home. It shouldn't feel like something that was adapted for you, but it should be something that feels like it was made for you in the first place. So if you enter a room and nobody speaks your language and everything is just very different, it can be interesting if you're willing to put in the effort. But if it's about purchasing something online or using a service, in the end, is it really about providing a service to the user, or is the user doing you a favor of using your website? And if somebody visits this place which you own, I think you can do a lot of like making them really feel at home and putting in the work and getting feedback from native speakers and adapting towards that.
It took me 50 minutes to make you drop the word chat GPT, and since we we have let the cat out of the bag now, we should talk about AI and automation, workflow integration a little bit this morning as well. How can GenAI help in content localization for developers, or how can it help best, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's certainly no secret that translating the act of translating words and sentences and interfaces was certainly one of the areas which have been like very heavily changed by artificial intelligence, by generative AI. Yeah, I think it still comes down to if you approach it from a tooling perspective, like how can developers integrate with this? I think Crowdin, for example, provides really helpful tools in this area. Like, for example, the Crowdin CLI, which helps you as a developer to upload and download translations quickly, and then also integrate it with your CI pipeline. So that's also something that we're doing in the course for as you're building a new feature and as you're changing or adding new translations to your app, you'll automatically receive new translations for all the languages that you support, and these are automatically pushed to your Git repository. So I think that's a workflow that can really help developers for integrating this into like the daily tasks. But still, we need to make sure that these translations are accurate. So providing context here is quite important, and Crowdin also has really great features here. But
Do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite one that you can tell us about?
Yeah, I mean, if we discuss AI and doing this in an automated way, I think attaching context to your messages is just really important. And that's one area I'm currently working on in Next-intl as well, to do this much better and also in an automated fashion. So I think for a future where we at least get a draft from an artificial intelligence very quickly to be able to ship a feature, this is very important. So you can still do manual user testing on top, but still always being in a place of being able to ship is quite important, I think.
Yeah. Since you plugged your course, I should plug one of ours. You know, monthly, Dorota Pavlak and I do a Crowd on Power Up series. And we just did a piece. Our last episode is on the vector clouds functionalities in Crowd, and really interesting stuff that directly touches on the context reference that you alluded to. So I highly recommend that for people that are interested in these kind of technical topics, so to speak. How do you integrate AI tools into your developers' daily workflow?
Yeah, so integrating with a command line interface or with a continuous integration pipeline is certainly approaches that I suggest. But I think there's one area which is a little bit less discussed currently, and it's generative AI is, of course, not only used to generate translations, but it's increasingly also used to generate source code. And I think that's also something we're doing in the course. So we're coming up with a custom rule set so you can generate source code and at the same time extract relevant translations from your source code so you're able to upload it to Crowdin, for example. But this is also an area where I'm currently actively working from the library side, where I think Next-intl can do a slightly better job of defining translations in line, but having the extraction process being done by a tool. So ideally, AIs which generate source code should only be concerned about local reasoning of one particular component without having to touch your translations, and this being done automatically for you. So this is also an area that I'm currently actively working on and where I'll have more news in the future.
That's very interesting. So much is going no codes and as of lately. Does it worry you as a professor that people can now generate these the codes automatically? And should people still learn how to code at this point, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think the first time I saw ChatGPT, and it was within the first week it was released, I got an email from a student in that week, a question about the material and about the homework, and I just pasted it into ChatGPT, and it basically returned exactly what I would also have said to the student. So I thought, oh no, my job is obsolete now. But then I thought, I can also just give the AI the description of the homework and have it produce the code. So basically also in this scenario, the student is kind of obsolete. But I mean, that's like the most dramatic scenario. I think realistically we'll end up somewhere else. But I mean, it's still actively something to figure out. But something I personally believe in is we need to be like really good product developers. Like just being like technical people was very relevant, and I think will be to a certain degree. But more than that, it's about understanding the big picture and the features you're developing having a relevance for the product itself. And AI can help you do that in a much quicker way. So that's something I personally believe in.
Yeah, I am also very interested in the changes in global apps as far as SEO is concerned. I'm sure you're interested in that kind of thing as well. How important is SEO for multilingual apps at this point in the junction, and what are your recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, search engine optimization is very relevant, and we've already discussed AI and also showing up in like ChatGPT, for example, and other chat interfaces is very important. And of course, also for multilingual and multi-regional applications, this is important. And I think the distinction here again comes, if you're building something multilingual, using the language of your users can really help you to show up in like the relevant parts, because people will search in their native language. But then on the other side, also having a multi-regional answer here is important. And so when it comes to search engine optimization, if you read through the Google Docs, the answer is a little bit more fuzzy here. It's not about like so if you're declaring content language, it's basically a tag which you can use at the right places. But if you want to say, I'm offering the service in this country, it's not so definitive. It's more about providing certain signals to search engines, like for example, mentioning the country, having an address in that country, using local phone numbers, being registered on Google Business, for example. So I think these kinds of indicators are also something that we'll see more in artificial intelligence. If somebody wants to purchase a product, of course they want to have it like with quick delivery and also cheap delivery. So I think also the multi-regional aspect needs to be considered here as well.
What are the top mistakes developers make when they're dealing with multilingual SEO?
Right. So there's a good study on this from Ahrefs, which are kind of experts in this field, and they claim that I think 67% of websites have problem with a concept that is referred to as hreflang. And hreflang is about listing all the localized variants of pages that you provide to users. And there's quite a nuanced twist to this. So like on the surface level, the concept seems easy, but they're just like in the details, there can be mistakes, which ultimately trip you up. So this is also an important area which we cover in the course to discuss in depth, so we can make sure we're not part of those 67% who get it wrong, but the 33% who get it right.
Yeah, maybe one last question before we let you go. You've been very generous with these technical specifications, and we love you for that. If you had one piece of advice for developers just starting with internationalization, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm probably the most biased person to say this, but taking the course might not be the worst idea.
Take advantage. This is your chance. Go ahead.
Right. No, on a more serious note, I've spent the last 5 years talking to developers who work on internationalization, and I think that the struggles you can run into are quite different. And I've taken quite some time of like finding the common root causes and finding solutions to this. And that's all that my internationalization library does, and also all that's discussed in the course. So if you're excited about this topic and internationalization is something that you want to be your competitive advantage as a developer and as a product company, then I hope the course can be a good service to you.
All right, awesome. Thank you so very much, Jan, spending some time with us at the Agile Localization Podcast by Crowden this morning. We'll keep a close eye on you. People can look you up on LinkedIn as well, I assume, and ask you a question if they wanna follow up further. And your course is available online, of course. Thank you very much, and we wish you a wonderful rest of the day in Austria.
Thank you so much, Stefan. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Well, folks, that's a wrap on today's episode of the Agile Localization Podcast by Crowden. We hope you found it as insightful as we did. If you enjoyed today's conversation and want to learn more about how leading companies are managing their multilingual content efficiently, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. Thank you for tuning in. For more resources on how to streamline your localization process, visit crowdon.com. See you next time.